deontology derived from the Greek words deon or duty and science or study of logos. Deontology is one of those kinds of normative theories regarding which choices are morally required, forbidden, or permitted. Good morning, Sir Benji Abreu. I, Rachel Ann Balusano Lagari, together with my groupmates, will be discussing deontology. Before we proceed with an in-depth discussion, let's tackle this story first. Reggie, a taxi driver from Baguio City, returned a passenger lost suitcase with valuable items worth 260,000 pesos without any promise of reward. Despite the temptation to sell the contents for personal gain, Reggie believed in doing the right thing. Actions highlight a moral conviction to prioritize honesty and integrity over financial benefits, showcasing ethical behavior and a commitment of moral principles. To hold a moral conviction means believing that it is one's duty to do the right thing. So, what is duty? Why does one choose to follow his duty even if doing otherwise may bring her more benefits? To further understand the ontology, my group mates will discuss duty, agency, autonomy, and other related concepts.
Now, let's proceed to deontology. But before that, let's define what is deontology. Deontology is the study of obligations and duty. So, deontology is actually the principle of what is right and what is wrong based on the obligation and duty. When you try to analyze things based on your duty and obligation, therefore, you are talking the idea of deontology. The main proponent of deontology is Immanuel Kant. According to him, if you know how to evaluate your action properly, then you are already practicing the idea of deontology. In this work, Kant brings our attention to the fact that we humans have faculty called rational will, which is the capacity to act according to the principles that we are determined for ourselves. Humans and animals are both sentient organisms, which means that both have the capacity to have feelings. The distinct difference is that the rationality. Another similarities between animals and a human is that animals will interact to their surroundings and humans will respond to our external environment. Although animals will react with their environment but they don't think whether it is right or wrong, but humans will evaluate our action because we are rational being. The part of being rational is that we are surrounded with our mental faculty. These are the ideas, thoughts, and images or abstracts. According to deontology, Kant stated that we are capable to stop and think about what we are doing. This means that we don't say that let's do this even if it's wrong because we are rational being. We are able to think what is right and what is wrong. There are two types of construction. The first one is imagine things and the second one is implementation. Through this the capacity of your imagination and reflection, you can easily transform the world you live in or even yourselves. We don't rely on our mental construction only. We also have the ability to act on those mental images. Kay gaw na una man ka, kailangan mo lihok ka. Kung di ka layan mo lihok, di ayaw una. Inana mo na siya ka-simple. However, when you act, it should be consistent with your reasons. Animal act is based on their natural instinct. On one hand, human also act the same but with rationality. You think first before doing such act. This means that we do not simply react to the environment. That cause of our actions is based on our reasons. Agency is the ability of a person to act based on her or his intention and mental states. Why? Because of your reasons, human is the only beings or creature who have the reasons to think or to do such acts. So therefore, you have this agency.
So good afternoon everyone, I am Christy G. Review and I will be reporting about autonomy. So when you talk about autonomy, this is the opposite of heteronomy. Autonomy means self-law, so when you talk about autonomy, it means you are the one who set a balaod to yourself. When you talk about heteronomy, means ang laing tawo ang maoy naghatag og balaod para sa imong kaugalingon. Like for example, when you are still young or kita atong bata pa wala kita kabalo kung unsay sakto o dili sakto. That's why natay parents moingon nga you need to brush your teeth. Kanya moingon pud kang why? Kay sumaw to explain ato ang mama. So ang nag-implement ana nga law is sila. Gitawag na sila heteronomy because ilaha man ang balaod. That's why I or we need to brush our teeth. Pag-brush na ko sa kuang teeth, nasulod na sa ako ang system or pag-brush na ko sa kuang teeth, nasulod na sa ako ang system, naging part na sa ako ang pagiging ako. That's why every day I always brush my teeth, so dili na kinahanglan nga sige pa sila advice to brush my teeth. Ako na nahimo ng autonomy, nahimo ng self-law. Kay na part naman siya or kay na part naman sa pagiging ako, that's the idea of autonomy and heteronomy. So we are the subject of the law. Mayroon ta ang subject, ako subject ko sa law, kay kung estudyante ka or like ako estudyante ko, dapat maningkamot ko. That's why I am doing this also. Lisod ng tinuod, pero usahay this is part of being a student. Usahay lisod jud. So, naatay gitawag na self-law kay naapod tay gitawag na other law nga nung mo-comply man ka sa or kita nga nung mo-comply man ta sa requirements sa ato ang instructor. Kay sila ang authority figure. Right? Sila ang nag-implement mao ning gitawag nga heteronomy kay sila ang nag-implement para mosunod ta kay ning sunod man ta, meaning kung naa sila yung mga requirement naanad na ta nga naa sila yung mga requirements ana mahimo na siyang autonomy because na part na sa ato ang system. So maong dapat daw kita isip sa katawo dapat makabalog yun ta kabalog yun ta mopili kung unsa tong tan-aw nimo nga sakto para nimo ug ang ubang tawo pod nga tan-aw pod nimo nga ang ilang gisulti sa imo sakto pod. Kay naa man tay self-law and then other law. So nasabtan na ba? So that is all about my report kabayan sa autonomy, and Regine Lindaya will be continue reporting about autonomy.
This statement is questioning Reggie's principle that he should benefit from other people's losses because he perceives that them as careless. Suggested that even though Reggie internally justify his actions, it doesn't align with true autonomy as defined within the Cartesian framework. Autonomy, in this context, refers to the ability to act according to self-imposed principles that are in accordance with the moral law, rather than simply acting based on one's own desires or self-interest. Reggie's principle fails to uphold the categorical imperative which requires treating treating others as a treating others rather In this passage, Kant distinguishes between three types of choice: free choice, animal choice or arbitrarium brutum, and last is human choice. First, we have free choice. Free choice refers to the decisions that are determined pure reason, unaffected by internal inclinations or impulses. And next is animal choice, which we call arbitrarium brotum. On other hand, is determined solely by inclination or sensible impulses, without the intervention of rational deliberation. Next is human choice. Human choice, according to Kant, occupies a middle ground between those two streams. So in this influence the inclinations or impulses, but it's not determined by them. Instead, human choice can be guided by pure will, which involves rational deliberation and adherence to moral principles. While human choice may not be immediately inherently pure without the development of rational skills, it can still be directed towards actions in accordance with pure will and reflecting a higher higher a higher moral agency than animal choice. This statement delves into Kant's differentiation between choices or decisions determined by sensible impulses and those influenced by pure reason. Sensible impulses encompass bodily instincts, desires, and emotions such as hunger, thirst, sexual desire, jealousy, and rage. Kant refers to actions driven solely by sensible impulses, impulses as animal choice or arbitrium brotum. In contrast, choices determined by pure reason are termed free choice. Human freedom, according to Kant, lies in the capacity of reason to mediate within arbitrium brutum. Reasons allows individuals to deliberate and assess alternative actions, breaking the immediacy of a stimulus or reaction. For example, a jealous partner or an enraged basketball player, if exercising self-possession, can refrain from reacting impulsively and instead construct a rational response aimed and trust of sportsmanship, respectively. Human choice can be affected by sensible impulses, but it is not determined by them. This implies that while humans share some characteristics with animals rather, such as being susceptible to sensible impulses, they also possess rational faculties, rational faculties that enable them to transcend more animality. In essence, humans are not solely animals, but also rational beings, as a captured by correlative correlative conjunction, not only but also. This statement explored the distinction between two possible causes of human actions: sensible impulses and the faculty of reason. It suggests that human freedom lies in this distinction. In the context of Regis' decision regarding the Sweet case, his actions will be considered um, heteronymous if they were determined by sensible impulses, such as a greed or shame, rather than by pure reason. According to Kant, autonomy is properly of will only when actions are determined by pure reason. In contrast, actions determined by sensible impulses are considered heteronymous because they are they are they are akin to foreign impulses that do not originate from self-legislating faculty of reason. Therefore, if Rigi were to act based on impulses of greed of shame, his will would be considered heteronymous because it is being compelled by external and internal forces rather than by rational deliberation. In contrast, autonomy occurs when actions can cause by pure reason. Acting according to pure reason means deliberating and choosing actions that align with moral principles and universal laws. Rather than being driven by immediate desires or emotions, autonomy, as the same, reflects the capacity of individuals to govern themselves based on rational considerations rather than being subject to internal compulsion. Thank you.
Now, let's proceed to universability. To figure out how the faculty of reason can be the cause of an autonomous action, we need to learn a method or a specific action that will demonstrate autonomy of the will. But before explaining this procedure, it will be helpful to first make a distinction about kinds of moral theories, namely substantive theories and formal moral theories. A substantive theory immediately promulgates the specific actions that comprise that theory. As such, it identifies the particular duties in a straightforward manner that the adherents of the theory must follow. The set of the Ten Commandments of the Judeo-Christian tradition is an unambiguous example of a substantive theory. The specific laws are articulated mostly in the form of a straightforward moral command: honor your father and mother, you shall not kill, and so forth. In contrast, a formal moral theory does not supply the rules or the commands straight away. It does not tell you what you or may not do. Instead, a formal moral theory provides us the form or framework of the moral theory. To provide the form of a formal moral theory is to supply a procedure and the criteria for determining on one's own the rules of moral commands. Metaphorically, we can think of a cookbook as a skin to a formal moral theory. In a cookbook, we are given instructions on how to cook certain dishes, but we are not given the actual food themselves, which would be substantive. In following a recipe for a sinigang, for example, we may add a slight variation to the ingredients and sequence of the steps. But if we want the dish to remain sinigang and does not transform it into some other kind of viand like pochero, we need to follow the steps that are irrelevant to making sinigang. To be exact, a formal moral theory will not give us list of rules or commands. Instead, it will give us a set of instructions on how to make a list of duties or moral commands. Kant endorses this formal kind of moral theory, the Grandelberg zur Metaphysik der Sitten, which she wrote in 1785, embodies a formal moral theory in what he calls the categorical imperative, which provides a procedural way of identifying the rightness or wrongness of an action. Kant articulates the categorical imperative this way: act only according to such a maxim by which you can at once will that it become a universal law. There are four key elements in this formulation of the categorical imperative, namely action, maxim, will, and universal law. Kant states that we must formulate an action as a maxim, which he defines as a subjective principle of action. In this context, a maxim consists of a rule that we live by in our day-to-day lives, but it does not have the status of a law or a moral command that binds us to act in a certain way. Rather, maxim depicts the patterns of our behavior. Thus, maxims are akin to the standard operating procedures or SOPs in our lives. We act accordingly to a variety of maxims, even if we are not aware of them. Actually, we become aware of our maxims when we talk about ourselves, when we reveal our habits and the reasons behind them. For examples, we tell our friends of what we ordinarily do in certain specific situations. When the weekend comes, I usually go to the beach with my family to relax. When the exam begins, I go to mass so that I will be blessed with good luck. Whenever I meet my crush, I wear my hair in a braid so that he will notice me. These are usually personal policies that may or may not be unique to us, but we act according to these maxims nonetheless. This is why Kant calls a maxim a subjective principle of action. We have many maxims in our daily lives and we live according to them. In the formulation of the categorical imperative, Kant calls our attention to the kind of maxims that we live by. He claims that we ought to act according to the maxim by which you can at once will that it become a universal law. What does it mean to will a maxim that can become a universal law? It means that the maxim must be a universalizable, which is what it means to will that it become universal law. This means nothing other than imagining a world in which the maxim or personal rule that I live by were adopted by everyone as their own maxim. In this formulation, Kant is telling us to conceive of the maxim as if it obligated everyone to comply. This mental act of imagining a universalized maxim does not mean we picture a world in which everyone actually followed the maxim. The proper way to imagine the universalized maxim is not by asking, what if everyone did that maxim? But by asking, what if everyone were obligated to follow that maxim?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark John Ibarita and I will be discussing about universalizability. But first, let us define what is universalizability. Universalizability is a principle in ethics and moral philosophy that dictates that a moral statement or action is only right if it can be universally applied. This means that for an action to be considered morally acceptable, it should be possible for everyone to perform the same action in similar circumstances without leading to contradictions or negative outcomes. The concept is closely associated with the work of Immanuel Kant, particularly his formulation of the categorical imperative. There are four key elements of universalizability, including first is the generalization. So when we say generalization, it is a moral rule should be applicable to all similar situations. If a particular action is deemed right in one situation, it should be right in all relevantly similar situations. Second key element is the consistency. So when we say consistency, it is the principle demands that if an action is right for one person, it must be right for everyone. There should be no exemptions based on personal interest or specific context. The third one is non-contradiction. So, when we say non-contradiction, when a rule is universalized, it should not lead to a logical contradiction. For instance, if everyone lied, the concept of truth would be meaningless and the act of lying would be self-defeating. And the last or the fourth key element of universalizability is the impartiality. Moral decision should not be based on personal biases or preferences. Instead, this should be made from an impartial perspective, considering what would happen if everyone acted in the same way. So, to illustrate universalizability, consider the maxim. It is acceptable to steal if one is in need. When this is universalized, it implies that everyone could steal whenever they feel a need. This would lead to a breakdown of trust and security, ultimately making the principle self-defeating and contradictory. According to Kant's categorical imperative captured this idea with a directive. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. This means that before performing an action, one should be considered whether the principle behind it could be adopted universally without leading to negative consequences or contradictions. Kant's categorical imperative emphasizes acting based on maxims that could be universal laws. He illustrates this with the example of making false promises, where one borrows money without intended to repay. Kant argues us to imagine a world where everyone is obligated to act in this way. He highlights that such a maxim would lead to a logical contradiction as it would render the act of borrowing money meaningless as no one would lend. This demonstrates the importance of considering the universalizability of our actions. Kant argues that borrowing money without intending to pay it back is rationally impermissible. He states that this act contradicts the very meaning of borrowing, which implies the intention to return. Kant believes that universalizing this maxim would lead to self-contradict and logical impossibility. Actions that pass the universalizability test are considered objectively necessarily rational. In contrast, actions like borrowing money without intending to pay are objectively necessarily wrong. In summary, universalizability is about ensuring that moral principles and actions can be consistently and impartially applied to everyone, thereby promoting fairness and logical consistency in ethical decision making. That's all. Thank you.